Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Navigating NIL, powered by Ecker Sports. I'm Tyler Langford, and I'm very excited today to be joined by the guys over at NIL Village, Tyler Wallach and Ronnie Baker. Welcome on.
What's up?
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm excited to have you guys. It's an exciting time in the sports world. We were just chatting brackets, before we started recording. Do you guys want to give a sneak peek into maybe who your champion is before we get going?
You go ahead, Tyler.
I like Arizona. I'm a Creighton guy, but I think that's the team we run into in the Sweet 16 that probably takes us down. So
Okay.
I'm an Arizona guy this year. 2 7-footers, good front court. I'm a fan.
What about you, Tyler, too, I guess?
Yeah, so I can't pick Arizona because of what happened last year to TCU, and I'm a TCU grad. So back in 2004, so I can't go with Arizona. But what I would say I went ahead and picked UCLA. But that was before I realized, or my son told me that one of their main players is out. So I may be regretting that decision come Final Four time, but I'm going to stick with them.
Yeah, I told you earlier, I have not even looked at a bracket. I just know when TCU is playing. I used to be super into the March Madness stuff, but if I had to pick, I'd probably just pick Alabama. I think they've got a good shot at it and winning it all.
Totally fair pick. Yeah, Bama's got some very talented players and some solid analysis, Tyler. I know we got some TCU guys here, so hopefully, we got a couple of 6 seeds so we can stand in solidarity with Creighton and TCU.
Right. Exactly.
Alrighty. So March Madness is upon us. It's also a big time for NIL. If you guys remember last year when St. Peter's went on their run, Doug Eater got himself a massive NIL deal with Buffalo Wild Wings, was the talk of the town for a while. And I think since then, NIL has really become more normalized, but it's something that we hear about in the media as, you get quarterbacks committing for millions of dollars and these sensationalized headlines. And in reality, the NIL market is made up a lot more of people like you guys, right? Marketplaces make up a big chunk of the market, and social media sponsorships are really important. So if you guys wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about what NIL Village is, why you started it, and kind of just give us some details on what you guys are doing.
So our focus is really about the athlete. We wanted to be 100% on the athlete. And so what we wanted to do was create something that's very similar to like a GoFundMe, but I think it's our impression, or it's my opinion, that athletes, absent certain circumstances, can't go on to GoFundMe and try to raise money, right? I think there are certain exceptions for, if there's an injury, or if there's something that happens with their family, if there's something pretty extreme. So what we wanted to do was fill that gap and say, well, how can we get athletes to come on, and how can we get folks to be able to support them? And it could be anybody, right? So you have like the top 2% of folks going out there and getting with collectives. And the collectives are getting, a lot of money, but they're getting them from the top 2% of folks. It's like our thought was, well, how do we get the other 98% of the people out there to be able to support their favorite athletes? So that's why we created NIL Village. And so athletes could come on, they could create a profile, and we could use their NIL in exchange for using their NIL, their name, image, and likeness. Then anybody could be able to contribute to them and support them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, you mentioned it. I think definitely the top 2% and 1% of those deals are the ones that people see and the ones that the headlines focus on, but getting the other 98 is really important. And so, Ronnie, I know you've got a background as an athlete. How has that impacted your experience working in NIL?
Yeah, for me, I think that it's one of those things that obviously when I was in school, like it wasn't around. So I was actually at TCU and I ran track there. And it's just cool to see just kids being able to use their name, image, and likeness to be able to, get paid. I think that it's one thing that, especially with big sports like, football and basketball at some schools, they bring in a lot of money for the universities. I mean, even at TCU, it's like we call it Texas Construction University because there's always something being built. And it's like, we know that money is like, yeah, some of it's donor money, but most of it is because our football team does well and they go to these big bowl games and all this stuff. And so it's like these athletes are bringing in all this money for the university and they're putting up new buildings where they can have more kids come, which is bringing in more money for the university. And it's like, hey, there's, being able to spread that wealth has been really cool just to kind of see how that's worked and how it's operated. Obviously, it's kind of the wild, wild west right now, but it's really cool just to see athletes being able to capitalize on that because athletes work super hard to be able to perform at the highest level, and then they get to, wear the school's name on their back. So for me, being at the pro level, just being able to see these kids do it it's awesome. Yeah, it's been fun.
Definitely. So Tyler, not being an Olympian, but being involved in the sports and the NIL realm, how did your journey in NIL start? Where did you get going on, this path?
Yeah, well, my dream was always to be an Olympian, but it didn't really. After eighth grade, it just kind of stopped panning out for me.
Right.
But no, so I'll tell you. So I graduated from TCU in '04, went to law school, graduated law school, and I've been practicing law since 2007. Right. So I've always had an interest in the law. I've always had an interest in kind of these rules and regulations over the NCAA athletes, and I've always wondered to myself why can't they make money off their name, image, and likeness? So I was happy to see that when I think it was Ed O'Bannon, saw that his name, image, and likeness was still being used in a video game. That he got up and he sued. He sued the NCAA and he sued some of these other folks and said, why am I not making money off of this? So as an attorney, I went back and I read that case and I read the subsequent cases that followed, and so went back and read kind of all these rules and regs, and then and so then I started thinking, and the wheels start turning in my head of, there's a market out there, and if I were an athlete, and most of these athletes out there, they're not getting a full scholarship to go to school, right? Most of the athletes are probably either non-scholarship athletes or they're partial scholarship athletes, and school's expensive, right? I mean, school is increasingly very expensive to attend, even for state universities. And so, a lot of these athletes, they're not that they're struggling necessarily to get by, but they do need some support. In speaking with a lot of the athletes that at least we have it on NIL Village, not only do they have class, but they have practice, they have workouts, they have games, and they don't have time necessarily to maintain a job, even necessarily a part-time job. So my thought process was, well, how do we, again, I think I said this earlier, how do we fill that gap? How can we get everybody else in their lives, friends, family, those folks that, attend their games, anybody, to be able to support them? And so I thought, well, let's create an NIL Village. Let's get out there. Let's make this look something similar to like a GoFundMe where they can set up their profiles, and a lot of them are, and the interesting thing is a lot of them aren't necessarily, asking for money for themselves. Some of them are because they need help with the educational expenses, but some of them are, actually I would say a lot of them actually are raising money for different causes, which is actually pretty incredible. The fact that they get out there, they use their name, image, and likeness for for causes that are not for themselves but for other people, which tells you something about these athletes, and it's something very, very special. And so that was my thought process on, how can we get in there and create something for the athletes where everybody can contribute to them. And, I went out there and I did some research with the open doors, and I thought, okay, well, there are marketplaces out there, that exist, but while there's a market for it, and there's a lot of athletes that jump on these marketplaces like open doors or whatnot, they're more like one-offs, you know? And so it's not really an environment of necessarily support. It's how can I capitalize on these athletes for my own benefit? If I want them to sign something for my kid, if I want them to market a product for me, that's not really our angle. Our angle is how can we support the athlete? How can other people support the athlete? And that's why we're all about the athlete.
Yeah. I mean, can I, even just to jump in on that, like one of the big things is that I think when people see collegiate athletes, they assume that everyone that is a collegiate athlete is getting their school paid for, which Tyler talked about. It's like, that's not the case for most of them. I was a rarity. I actually got a scholarship to go to TCU and attend 4 years there. But the reality is that most of the kids there, they're not on scholarship. They're having to pay to be able to compete in their sport at that level. And so I mean, just to piggyback on that, what Tyler said, just being able to help those kids. And also, I have, like, as an athlete, I had an open doors account. So like, I know that it's very much one-off. It's like, hey, post this and boom, we get you out of here. So it's kind of, again, it's for that company's benefit. They're more about, like, again, getting you in, seeing what you can do for them, and then kind of pushing you off to the side. I think it's really cool that we work with the athletes a little bit more specifically, and really through as long as, their stint in colleges. If that's 2 years, if they get into NIL Village as a sophomore, we work with them for 2 years, however long that is, really the extent of their collegiate eligibility. So just some different things that NIL Village is doing that separates us from other companies.
That's fantastic. So then what was the intersection between you guys? So Tyler, you got this started up and then you found Ronnie, or you guys are what? Give me the story behind the chuckles.
Crazy. I was gonna say, crazy enough, like I was at Target, right?
Yeah.
Me and Tyler have never met. I didn't know he went to TC or anything, but he's there shopping with his son, right? I'm pretty sure your son was with you.
Yep.
We're looking at some games, like board games, because this is like kind of coming out of COVID maybe ish area. So like board games, everyone's playing board games now. Like people are playing Monopoly way more in the last 3 years than they ever have. You've got time to kill, so you can play a 3-hour game. So they're looking at games. I just strike up a conversation when I think he maybe had on some TCU stuff, asked him about TCU, started talking business a little bit. And from there, we met up a couple times at a few coffee shops, and Tyler was like, hey, I got this idea. And he asked me if, because I went to TCU, I ran track. He's like, hey, would you be interested in helping me out with this, being kind of the athlete, that's working with us, working with NIL, kind of bring, develop relationships. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of the wild story of this all coming together, is that I didn't know that Tyler had this idea, but we were just talking, casual. He's like, yeah, I do this part-time. Like I'm doing this full-time, but I'm thinking about doing some other stuff. And I was like, yeah, so there's met at a Target of all places.
Yeah. It was very coincidental, but great.
Crazy. So you never know who you're going to run into.
No, that's awesome. And you got to love the Horned Frogs connection. That's great. We have a big part of the business we do is in Texas. So we've got definitely a soft spot for the frogs. That's awesome. So then you guys get this thing going. So when did you start? When did you open up NIL Village?
So weirdly enough, I wanted to get it out and get it going right around March Madness. But I think I was maybe overly ambitious, thinking that I could put something out there that's brand new and then people would just sign up, right? And so there's many lessons you learn when you're trying to start a business, and that is one of them. Is that you got to build credibility first, right? If you don't have that credibility, if people don't trust you and people don't know what you're putting out there, they're not going to just come up and come on and sign up with you. So it was really, so we did that, and then for the next month or so after March Madness, really just kind of pounding the pavement, trying to get in contact with athletes, and we kind of used our connections with TCU to get in contact with TCU athletes. And thankfully, the ladies from the women's soccer team were kind enough to kind of to listen and to hear us out, and they were kind of our first takers. So Peyton Cruz, who's with TCU Soccer, who graduated, and then Gracie Bryant, who's also with TCU Soccer. I think she's got a senior year to go. They were our first folks, and I'm glad they kind of took a chance and signed up. And that was about in May. So we've been kind of trying to sign up athletes and go from there.
That's awesome. And so Ronnie, you're still doing the professional track and field circuit, correct?
Yeah, I'm still competing at that level. Yep.
So then what's it been like for you to transition from, you've spent pretty much your entire adult life as, a full-time athlete, which comes with beyond just practicing and running. Obviously, you're managing your own brand, you're doing endorsement deals. There's a lot that comes with it. How did those experiences as an athlete kind of translate to the business world, and how have you navigated, doing both?
That's a really good question. I think that a lot of the skills that we learn as athletes, especially, there's not too many collegiate athletes that you can't put the characteristic of discipline. So I feel like if you're going to be at that level, you've got to be somewhat disciplined. You've got to be a hard worker, because really, if you're talking about collegiate level athletics, most of the people there are the top, high school performers. Like it's everyone that was good in high school is now playing at the collegiate level. So I think that it's helped, especially having conversations with these athletes and being in the NIL space. it's just really helped me to understand, especially from a track and field perspective, because, with the endorsements and things like that, they really only come around every 4 years because of the Olympics. And so just being able to even still put myself in the collegiate athlete's shoes that, especially for a lot of the sports that we have kids in right now, is some of the non-revenue sports, which I was a non-revenue sport, and shoot, track and field basically is a non-revenue sport now, even at the professional level sometimes. So I just can relate to them, and I'm able to connect with them in a way where I kind of know where they're at. I know some of the questions to ask them, and also just how to help them be able to market themselves better, because I've had to deal with some of those challenges being in this sport, and obviously only getting the spotlight every 4 years, and really like having to win at a high level in order to really get the big deals. So I think that just with the discipline, the hard work, obviously transferring that into business has been everything, but also learning how to, like Tyler said, it's like, just because you have this name or this brand or whatever, like, it's not just like you create something and everyone just flocks to you. You have to create that credibility. I think that's one big thing, as being in business has really helped me understand. It's like, no one really cares. It's like, you got to figure out how you're helping that person. And then that's how you create these relationships, and you build a business that people can get behind, is you add value to them first. And so that's like something that's cool, but also challenging. And it's fun to just be able to figure that out and navigate that through NIL Village and with Tyler. So it's been really fun.
That's great. And then Tyler, you're kind of the flip side, right? I mean, you were a lawyer, you were on the business side of things, right? You have an understanding of that, and now you're making the jump into the sports world, which is, as a fan, it's one thing, and then, as I've learned over the last year plus, then you get into the actual industry, and it's a whole different, experience. What's it like for you to translate what you were doing before into NIL Village and working with athletes, and you're in a new and constantly changing industry?
Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, like, with regard to NIL, there's not a whole lot of precedent, so there's, everything that we're doing now, everybody's trying to figure out, and I'm sure that Eckerd Sports is kind of the same way. It's, y'all are just now getting started in this industry. So, everybody right now is just kind of feeling their way through this NIL, at least for college athletes. Obviously, it's been around for, many other people, many other levels for a long time. But yeah, I mean, so we're just at this point, we're just kind of filling ourselves out. And I'll tell you, I've had a blast. When I went to college, I attended the games, I watched the games and all that good stuff. And I've always been a sports fan, but the athletes, other than, I didn't get to hang out with, the athletes, the college athletes. And so, being able to kind of speak with them, being able to kind of listen to Ronnie and his athlete spotlight, and kind of, listening to what drives them, and why they do what they do, why they train. And, these, it's a totally different perspective than I think that what you see on TV or what you read in the papers or what you read, online. And, I'm truly enjoying every moment of this.
Good. No, it's fun, being on you're kind of writing the history of NIL every day, just because it's such a new, like, it's always changing. I mean, from where we were a year ago in March of 2022, with, I just a few states legalized for high school NIL, to now when you've got 27, it's growing in different ways than I think all of us could have imagined. So it's really interesting. And one thing that makes sense, but that's been really clear in terms of trends in the NIL industry is, it's a lot of it is a social media / influencer market. And B, relating to that is you have to manage your brand and market yourself really effectively. And Ronnie, you had kind of touched on the fact that, the track experience is very cyclical, whether it's, the NCAA tournament is coming up if you're in college and you have to make it, or the Olympics are coming up and you know that you have big sponsorship deals. So I've two questions. First, what did you do and what do you do kind of to market yourself throughout, that cycle? And how do you focus on being able to get deals in between those 4 years? Because obviously, you need some income while the Olympics aren't happening.
Right.
And then secondly, how do you guys, help athletes and talk to athletes about managing their brands and the importance of how they represent themselves?
Yeah. So I'll speak on just managing brand outside of that Olympic year. What I've noticed and what I've kind of done recently in the last couple years is, I mean, especially with track and field, there's not a lot of information about it out there. So for me, I've kind of gone into doing a little bit of online training, and so that's like one big space for me is just kind of being this online coach for a lot of people, because there's so many people that ask like, what do Olympic athletes do, and there's very little information on actual training and things of that nature. And so I developed a program where basically I just give it all away. Like, I just tell everyone what I do. But I think it's really important, especially in those like you talked about it being cyclical and being those off years. It's really important that you develop yourself outside of just your sport, because you can get to a point where everyone just sees you as a track and field athlete or just sees you as a volleyball player. And, athletes are so much more complex than that. We're human beings. And so I think it's good to show people your hobbies and show people what you're passionate about outside of sport, or why you do the sport, and how the thing outside of that is driving you to do better in your sport or to achieve at a higher level. And I think that's what we do with the athletes on the Athlete Spotlight, is that we get to know them outside of their sport so that people can get to know them just from them throwing a baseball or spiking a volleyball. So I think that that's super important in the off years, is just, again, yes, keeping the fact that you are an athlete in there, because a lot of the times your audience is there because you are an athlete and they want to see like the basketball stuff and the drills and they want to see that stuff, but also mixing in there your own personality, because that's what separates you from the other basketball player or the other track and field athlete. And that's how you get those deals and you get those sponsorships, because you show your personality. And sometimes these companies, they might not always want to work with the biggest, athlete that they're going to have to pay a lot of money to. They're probably looking for maybe someone that they can work with more. And maybe they have a certain market, or they have a certain like culture of people that you would fit better in. And so you being able to show your personality in that, it gives them a way to be like, okay, this person's going to work really good for what we want to do in the community that we're trying to reach. And so I think that that's super important, especially in those off years of just being yourself, putting yourself out there outside of your sport, to really capture some attention and just show your authentic self.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And then just in terms of how you guys approach conversations with athletes, when you guys are talking to them about the NIL process and how they're representing themselves, and do you guys have any tips that you will give people who are going through the NIL process?
Tyler, you want to answer that one?
I don't know if I have tips per se, but I will say like for our purposes, for NIL Village, I will tell you that you know I think every athlete is kind of a brand unto themselves, right? And that's something I think that we take very seriously. So when an athlete signs on with us and they say we're giving you the rights to use my name, image, and likeness, they're trusting us with a lot. They really are. And so, they got a reputation to upkeep, and we want to make sure that we put the athletes in the best light possible. Because it doesn't do us any good, and it doesn't do the athlete any good if we don't. So, if I had advice for the athletes, I would say, seek out those deals, with companies that you agree with, and make sure that they're not taking advantage of you. Talk to other people, see if they've had dealings with the company as well. Make sure they're reputable. Make sure they treat you well. Make sure they don't take advantage of you in terms of like with their contracts, things like that. But you really need to get out there and you really need to learn about these companies before you sign on with them. Learn what they're about, and make sure that they're going to protect your name and your reputation.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I totally agree with that. When you said, Tyler, to, you know, check the companies out, because there's been a lot of times where I've gotten opportunities that the the company doesn't really match with my brand, if that makes sense. And so it's one thing to, yeah, I want these big deals and I want a lot of money, but if you've been, as we just talked about this, putting your personality out there, and then you have this one picture that you're painting to your whole community, and then you partner with a brand that's completely different from that. Now you're confusing your community, and then you lose eyes. And it's, I mean, that's what NIL is about, right? You talked about it being kind of social media ish, like right now it's just like who has the most eyes on them, and that's how you can kind of get deals. And so I think that that's super important, just making sure that like the brand and, the company actually aligns with what you believe, because if you're putting out two different things, you're going to get two different results, and it's not going to be pleasurable for you. It's not going to be fun for you, because you're going to be marketing something or being a part of something that you don't believe in. So I think that that's super, super important as far as navigating that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so one thing you guys are familiar with that I hope our audience is, and if they're not, they should be, is we do an Ecker 10 every 2 weeks, which is just 10 questions with an athlete, and it's the same 10. And one thing, I try not to do too much overlap between the questions in there and the questions on the podcast, but one question I ask every athlete is something you talked about, Ronnie, is when you're going through the NIL process, is how do you determine which brands you want to partner with? And you talked about making sure it aligns with your brand. So I guess, would you mind giving some specifics on some things that you think through specifically when you get an offer from a brand? What are you thinking about in terms of, I'll take it, or I think maybe this isn't the opportunity for me?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, it's more goes down to just moral standards. I think that there's a lot of there's sometimes dealing with people. Obviously, every company you're dealing with somebody, like a person, and so just being able to talk to that person, seeing what they believe, some of the morals that they believe in, or some of the things that they back, and some of the things that they don't. So there's a lot of different companies out there, and there's a lot of different ways in which they market their brands. And so I think for me, it's more for me moral standards of like, what does a company represent? What are they putting out there to the public? And I'm very, very faith-based. So like, I think that for me specifically, I look at, what are the company's values? And so sometimes those values don't always line up with what I believe. And so it would be really hard for me, no matter what kind of money it is, it'd be really hard for me to work with a company that doesn't necessarily align with the values as far as morals. So I think that that's one big thing, because I feel like most companies they're all, the big ones especially, they've all had some kind of, hard work to get where they are. They've built it, they've created a community, they've created, this brand presence. And so I think more of it is just, again, down to values and morals, and exactly what does this company believe? What are their mission statements? What are they trying to do in the world? What's their end goal? Can I help them accomplish that? And if I can't, then that's something that for me would be a no-go.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of athletes have in common, and is a strong set of, this is what I will and won't do. And it's even, written into laws in quite a few states, specifically in the South, where it's, there's vice industry bans where you can't do alcohol or tobacco or gambling or drugs, which makes sense, right? Because, at that age, you don't want to be promoting something that maybe 10, 15 years down the line, you don't want to, be involved with.
Right. Yeah. Or have them, have you being on TV and them talking about your gambling addiction because
right.
You're
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
commercial.
Right. Because then that might scare away other brands. I mean, if you're, you mentioned it, like how you represent yourself matters. So if you're partnering with brands that you might not care, but it doesn't align with the morals or the mission statements of other companies, those companies are going to go to any of the literally thousands of other athletes that are out there.
Right.
So
yeah,
I
sure
think
you can make a lot of money
point.
with a gambling with a gambling partnership for sure. But
right, as long as you're not the one doing the gambling.
Right, exactly.
No, definitely something worth keeping an eye on. So one final segment we do for every episode before we go. I know we've got you guys coming on again in a couple weeks, so we'll do Tyler this time around, is a little 5-second or a 5-question gauntlet of just a few interesting, endearing questions. So let's get ready to rumble. I think, Ronnie, you might learn a few things about your partner. So first thing is, you mentioned that in 8th grade, your Olympic dreams kind of died, but I'm assuming that means that you've got at least one embarrassing sports story out there. So I'd love to hear, just a funny moment from your athletic career.
So I mean, yes, I played sports throughout high school, and I played high school basketball, and didn't start, but second teamish. And being 5'7", it's difficult to to get up there and to play. But I'll tell you, so one of the games I got in, I was a point guard, so used to dribbling the ball, used to do whatever. And I caught a ball and took a jump step, and ref calls it travel. All right, I've done this thing like a million times, never been called for it. I was like, okay, all right, travel. So hand the ball over and do it again. Like 5 seconds later, not really, but like a few minutes later, I get the ball, hop step, travel. And then 3 times in a row, this ref calls me for traveling, and and by then I just I've never used the hop step since. But I've never had that many travels called on me in one game, at any point in my life except for that one, my senior year. And I'll tell you, my friends, I still have my high school friends who that's how they refer to me.
That's
yeah.
That's funny. Traveling Tyler. That's
it. Thank you.
Yep, that's tough. That's a tough one. Hey, I like how you said second team ish. That's a good way to. There you go. Fair enough. Second question is, what is your go-to cheat meal?
Cheat meal?
Cheat meal, yeah. If you're gonna have a blowout meal, what are you having?
Oh man, I go chicken fried steak, like a huge, gigantic chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes and gravy, just Southern style, just whatever you can throw on that plate. Yes, I'll eat
I
it.
love it. That was quick. You came ready with that one. And Ronnie liked it too. I'm with it.
Yeah, I don't have to train for anything. All I got to do is train to go sit at a computer all day. There's not much I have to do.
Like, what a life, man.
Next up, if you had a superpower, if you had to choose one superpower, what would it be?
So I've had this discussion with my son a lot, as we've discussed superheroes. And my thought is always the power to control people's minds, right? Okay. Because if you can control their minds, then you can do anything, right?
Yeah, you got a lot of NIL Village customers.
That's right. That would be nice. So I think that would be it. I know it's not cool, it's not flying, it's not things like that, but I do think it would be nice. So.
That's great. No, I'm with you. That is definitely a practical and solid answer. So then next up, if you were on a deserted island and you could only bring 3 things with you, what are you bringing?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I got this question once in high school, my senior year. I was trying out, I didn't try out, but we had this competition. I think it was called Mr. Nolan, because I went to Nolan Catholic High School, right? And I did not win. But the same question was asked, and I'm trying to remember my answer. I know. So you said 3 things?
Mm-hmm.
3 things. Okay. I think one of my answers was, a genie, right? So you can rub that, the bottle, get the genie out and get 3 more wishes. So that gives me 6. That's assuming that I don't get infinite wishes from there. Second thing, I'll consider that 3 out of the 6. So, all right. So another one, let's see, clean drinking water, obviously. I'd have to bring my wife and kids, because, I don't think my wife wants to be left at home, with the children. She'd want to make sure I share in that, the child rearing as well. So I think that's it. I think that gets me to 6 or 3. As you said.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's solid. Yeah. That's probably my favorite.
The wishes one. So that's a good one.
It is. And then finally, who is the best athlete you've ever gotten to watch compete in person?
Okay, well, I haven't got to see Ronnie yet in person. I'm waiting for that. So when he makes the Olympics, I think is it in Paris, Ronnie?
Yeah, it's in Paris.
Be there.
I'll be there. Awesome. No, I would definitely try to be there. He's probably the greatest athlete I've ever met in person.
There you go.
Truly, I don't know how he runs at the speed at which he runs. That's incredible to me. I mean, it really is amazing. So the greatest athlete I've ever seen in person. Let's see. Probably Dirk Nowitzki. So
that's a good answer.
Yeah, with the Mavs.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
So he's pretty amazing to watch. I went to a few playoff games in the early 2000s when the Mavericks were making their key runs, and they were, between him and Steve Nash and Jason Terry and that group of folks, it was amazing to watch.
No, that's a good one. Dirk was absolutely a hooper. No, that's fantastic, and I think that's a perfect way to end it. So I appreciate you guys so much for coming on, and everybody out there listening. Make sure you tune back in 2 weeks. We've got another 30 to 45 minutes of good content for you. So thanks, guys, for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us.